All right, welcome again, everyone. So glad you're joining us today. I would like to introduce our speakers. We have Taylor Campbell from Creative Commons who's joining us, and her colleague Monica Granados will also be joining us later on in the call. Taylor and Monica have been partnering with ASAPbio to disseminate the preprint policy framework that they're going to tell all of us about today. So I'm very excited to hear their report on this. I think we wanted to start off with a poll. Should I go ahead with that now, Taylor? What do you think? Yeah, we're
Yeah.
starting off with a poll, which is just we want to know who's in the room. So it's just one question. You can just answer. Should have hopefully popped up in your Zoom interface. And this will just give us a sense of who's here. We've got a nice sized crowd, probably quite diverse. I'm seeing a lot of diversity in responses, so that's great. All right, good. We've got 16 responses. That's nearly everyone, only a handful who haven't responded. Um, Great. So we have some researchers. Taylor, are you able to see the results?
No.
Okay, I don't know how this
I think
poll
it
thing
might be
works.
because I'm screen sharing though.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just read them out. We
Okay.
have 19 people who responded, four of them researchers, three of them representing publishers and journals. We have two representing preprint platforms, one representing a funder, four representing open access or open science advocacy organizations, and then another four other. So if you're in the other category, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and then I think that gives us a sense. We have a real wide span of folks here today, which is, I think, usually the case on our calls. Happy to see it. I'll turn it over to you, Taylor, and you can kick us off. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for completing the Zoom poll with us. It just helps us to get a little bit grounded in knowing how to frame the conversation that we're having about open practices and research, and specifically the Preprint Policy Framework that I will be introducing or saying more about for some of you today. My name is Taylor Campbell, as Katie mentioned. I am a senior manager for open data policy and governance at Creative Commons. And Monica, my director of open science, will be joining us at the half hour mark. So I'm just going to get us started. I'm also here with another team member, Eleanor. We've had the pleasure of working with ASAP on this amazing project and this effort that we're really excited to share more about today. Um, and so I'd like to just start by grounding us in the practices that we're committed to. As you can see here on the screen, in the age of AI, open practices reaffirm our shared commitment to growing the commons and ensuring equitable sharing of scientific research. That is what we're all about. That's what we're about at Creative Commons. And that's specifically why we love ASAPbio and we love working with Katie and ASAPbio. It's been a privilege to be able to commit every single day to the equitable sharing of scientific research. That's why we're here. And it's really, I did get a little, I don't know, it flashed, but I did see a little flash of the poll results just now. So it's really great that there's a nice spectrum of different relationships or roles to the sharing of scientific research. And we at Creative Commons, we really believe that all of those different roles are vital in making sure that that's ensured. So when we think about sharing scientific research, we really are focusing in on preprints. Um, Preprints and they're supporting open practices, but mostly starting with preprints. And that includes the open licensing of preprints. And these are all crucial components of the organizational policies that support this commitment. And as we get into the framework today, you'll learn a little bit more about how we have broken down these different policy components so that organizations can very formally and in writing support this commitment. So, what are we doing? We're working with funders and organizations around the world who are collectively facilitating open practices for preprints and early sharing of research by using, aligning with, and endorsing the Preprint Policy Framework. And we here at Creative Commons have partnered with the Gates Foundation to do this work. We are providing no cost consultation for research funders and research organizations that are updating their policies in alignment with the framework. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time going into our methodology and then I'll go into the framework itself. But if you want a sneak preview, the link is here on the screen. We'll be going through it together shortly. So our approach is pretty much threefold for those of you that are interested in methodologies. We ask for referrals to research funders and organizations around the world that are likely to require or support preprints, recognizing that there are an infinite amount. Those that are likely to require or support preprints are where we begin. And so the best way to get to those is to simply ask for referrals. We do presentations to organizations, community groups, and coalitions, just like this presentation now, so that discussions can be made peer to peer. We get a lot of conversation going in these presentations, and so I would like to invite you all to um, be as open and bold as you want to be in preparation for our Q&A portion of this call. We are eager to have the critical conversations that move this work forward. And we lastly consult directly with research funders and research organizations to introduce or expand policy language about preprints and open research practices at their institutions. Again, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Um, this is a comfortable space, a comfortable conversation, and we will do our best to address everything during the Q&A portion in the second half. Okay, so let's get into the framework itself. This is a screenshot from the website, which I will also do a quick screen share of the actual page. But for now, on the web page, you will see the policy framework consists of 6 policy items. And underneath these 6 items, the table of these 6 items, there's also a list of participating funders and organizations and whether they require or recommend each of the items listed below. So we're going to go through the different components so that you can have some more familiarity with the each of these items. The first is the preprint requirement, which states that preprints are either required or strongly recommended to be submitted to a publicly accessible server that issues a persistent identifier, such as a DOI, and made available at no cost to the author to post nor to the reader to view. As we all know, research is really only useful when people can actually access it. And posting preprints to free or open servers or platforms means that those findings are not held behind paywalls that most people can't afford. Sharing early also via preprinting means that your colleagues can engage with the findings while the work is still fresh and not after what could be a lengthy journal review process. And those persistent identifiers are really helpful because they help your work be cited or found. The next element of the framework is author's copyright. Authors retain copyright of their preprint unless waived through a CC0 public domain dedication or other arrangements like U.S. government work. This one focuses on making sure that the author doesn't lose the option to license their work openly. And it enables researchers to share, repost, or build on their work without having to ask a publisher for permission. It also means that researchers can iterate on their work which matters when it comes to, updating their scientific record and integrity. So we are reflecting the importance of author's copyright either being recommended or required. And across the framework, the narrative, the way that we're framing it is that your organization either recommends or requires each of these elements. The third element is the CC BY licensing, which states that a CC BY license is required or strongly recommended for preprints, unless waived through a CC0 public domain dedication. A CC BY license is the least restrictive license that's available. It means that anyone can use the work as long as they give credit. And the credit is attribution or credit is the only requirement, which is why it's the least restrictive. And therefore, it maximizes the shareability of the research. It also makes things cleaner across the board when combining or analyzing combining research for analyses. If the different research sources are all using a very simple, least restrictive CC BY license, it gets a lot easier to do interdisciplinary even analyses and just not have to deal with the legal complexity of different types of licenses that are being used. The next is submission timeline. This one says that preprints are uploaded to a server before or by the time of submission to a peer-reviewed outlet. Research needs to be shared easily, not just after it's been accepted somewhere. And so posting at submission is how that commitment gets put into practice. It recognizes that the time stamping is valuable, especially when we think about how research is being assessed in other contexts. And so it will be more specific for how the researchers can show the work that they've released. Next, we have the funder acknowledgement, which says that institutional affiliations, funders, and or grants are acknowledged in the preprints acknowledgements and or its metadata. This is to acknowledge who has paid for the research. This is to be upfront about that, and it also helps support those institutions, funders, organizations, or grantors as they are maintaining and tracking where the research that they've supported exists, especially on the metadata side. That's easier to analyze if it actually exists in the metadata. And then we have the availability statement, and this one says that a key resource table and or availability statement is required or strongly recommended, outlining where the associated data, code, software protocols, and key materials can be accessed or are deposited with the appropriate persistent identifiers if available. This is so that people can access the data or the code behind the study so that they can verify what's been done in the research. This makes reproducibility possible, and it means that the underlying materials can actually be found or findable, more easily findable, rather. And it provides all of the other information that would be needed to support the research. So, with that, I'm just gonna actually pause and do a quick screen share so that you can see the page itself. So this is the page. When you go to asappbio.org/preprint-policy-framework, you'll see a little intro here at the top, a link to a blog post that says more about the framework. And then you get into those 6 elements right here below. Underneath that is where you will see the different organizations that have already confirmed their alignment with the framework and are just the information is being shared on the page. And so, to give an example, we'll use Simon's Foundation. If you click on it, it expands, and you will see the six different elements of the framework and whether or not or how that organization is either requiring or recommending uh, that particular item. So for preprint requirement, yes, Simon's Foundation requires that. They do not require authors copyright nor CC by licensing. There's a little footnote here that shares that they do, however, require an open access license. Submission timeline is required, funder acknowledgement is required, availability statement and sharing plan in the case of Simon's Foundation are required, and then a link to the full policy. And you get that with each of the funders that are funders and research organizations, excuse me, that are listed here on the page. One of our goals for this project is to reflect more research funders and research organizations on the page. And as you can see here, quite transparently, it's not about whether or not that organization has yeses across the framework. It's more so about their participation and alignment with the fact that this is a framework and a standard that is useful. And so if you or your colleagues either are at an institution or organization that would like to be reflected or have a referral or recommendation for us, we would love, love, love to be introduced so that we can continue to show the strength of the coalition of funders around the world and organizations around the world that are aligning with the framework in this way. All right, I'm going to go back to the slides here and continue. Oh, yes. Okay, so I just had a screenshot of that here on in the slide deck as well. And here's another screenshot of the example that was shared, which is essentially the example for same thing, but the example for the aligning science across Parkinson's organization or foundation. So now that we've gone through the framework, I want to share a little bit about how researchers use the framework. So the first is when planning and submitting your research, you can use the framework. You can use it when negotiating with journals, when applying for jobs, grants, or tenure at institutions that value open research practices, when advocating within your institutions for the use of the framework or the partnership with organizations that do. When collaborating with journals or policymakers using publicly funded research and data, you can use it also by sharing it with other researchers. And lastly, by sharing it with research funders and organizations. This is essentially our call to action for you all because it's really great that we have the opportunity um, to have this and to share it with the world, but recognizing that, you know, like as we saw with the Zoom poll, different people play different roles in those processes. We would love to find ways for, even if you're not a funding or a research organization that's listed on the page, we would like more of the ecosystem to know about the framework and to use it in these ways. And the last thing that I will say is I would like to invite folks to direct folks to the chat. I do see that there's already some things that are being said in the chat. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But specifically, I want to take a moment before we dive into the Q&A portion. I would like to take a moment to ask a question, actually two questions, and invite you all to respond in the chat. The first question is, what funders or research organizations come to mind that are likely to require or support preprints? Please let us know in the chat. Um, and the second question is, how does the preprints framework that we just talked through relate to you and your work and your day to day? So again, first question is, what funders or research organizations come to mind that are likely to require or support preprints? Again, we at Creative Commons are open to referrals around the world. The best way to figure out where to go is to ask. So this is me asking. And secondly, how does the preprints framework relate to you and your work? Very, very interested in knowing that as well.
Thanks very much, Taylor. I wanted to invite anyone. You're also welcome to unmute, raise your hand, etc. if you want to just respond directly to Taylor's question. So we'll take responses either in the chat or if anyone is brave and wants to unmute and introduce yourself, that's also welcome.
Definitely. Yes, we do.
I am curious, Yuka, about the conservation organizations in particular. If you have some examples, that would be helpful to know. That's okay. Not knowing is also totally fine.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, the piggybacking on David Mower's comment about the Canadian tri-agencies, there's been some really interesting work going on there, and I'm not sure whether we have had the opportunity to connect with those organizations yet or not. I know the team, the CC team, has been reaching out to a variety of different funders as we have been working through this most recent round of the project. And right on cue, welcome, Monica.
Yeah,
We're
wow.
starting to discuss a little bit about organizations that might be promising leads for Taylor to reach out to.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm noticing in the chat as well. Yes, you mentioned the tri-agencies, Katie. Um,
mhm.
we love that recommendation. Also, Ludo said the funders in Coalition S, which is awesome. We actually just had a meeting, a presentation with the funders in Coalition S. It's a great group of funders that are also working, in open access. I don't, Monica, I don't know if you can see the history here, but Yuka said that most conservation organizations actually support um,
Oh,
support.
that's a stellar idea for the ones that like, yeah, give out funding. I know that's something that we were thinking about when we were running the Open Climate campaign. We were reaching out to, we were hoping to reach out to environmental organizations that funded research. Some of them have their own researchers as well, that where they might have some policies. Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. And then I see Jess mentioned the IIRC research funding in the UK demands open access. And then Theodora has a hand raised, so that we're basically at the point where we're ready to get into some conversation. So I think now would maybe be a good time to just have you introduce yourself. IIRC, if I remember correctly. That's so funny. I'm like, the IIRC, I need to Google them. It sounds like an organizational name. But thank you, Jess. Now would be a good time to just have you do a quick introduction of yourself, Monica, and then we can slide into the Q&A.
Hi, so just briefly, I'm Monica Granados. I'm the Director of Open Science. I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Taylor and Katie on the Preprint Funders Framework, and just have really seen the interest and openness that funders have had in harmonizing policies and advocating for preprints.
All right, Theo, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Sure, thanks. Hi, I'm Theo Bloom. I work at BMJ, but also helped establish the medRxiv preprint server and have been in this open domain since some of you were in very short pants indeed. And so I apologize for what I'm about to ask, that is a bit of an old open access sore point. You specify in the framework CC BY licenses for the preprints, but not that the servers have to be accessible to people without barriers. And there's a number of servers that require registration or other information from users before you can use them. So those are not, would not count as open access for publications. And yet, if they post CC BY preprints, does that make those open? I realize it's a bit of a nerdy point, but it is a bit of a sore spot.
Yeah, I think that is the type of nerdy point that we are into, Theo. So thank you for asking that question. I'll start, and obviously this is a kind of we're going to be passing it to each other as we answer questions. But I'll start by saying, yes, it is quite possible that we're working in the context of preprint servers or platforms that do not require a specific license to maximize the author's choice. In fact, we have worked in partnership with Open Archive and others on that very point here at Creative Commons. And where we have, in general, the development of the framework was a collaborative process where we actually most of the organizations that you saw on the bottom half of the page that I showed actually came together to iterate and hack away at the list that became the framework. And one of the main things that we kept having to tangent into and laugh about and then come back focus after is like there are so many different threads to pull at when it comes to making open access clean and simple and straightforward for all organizations and institutions. And so where we landed with the framework itself is that the framework is specifically to be a reflection of where an organization stands, not necessarily to require that an organization does a thing, and actually to start those conversations, to start the conversations about what should be required and why in support of open access, to start the conversations about whether or not an organization might want to consider changing its policy. And so we're not using the framework to dictate that CC BY be used by preprint servers. For example, as I mentioned before, we've actually worked in partnership with the major preprint servers, and we've had a long road of figuring out why that might not be the best case in every situation. And so where we've landed is that the preprint framework itself is more of a model for each institution to be reflected from. And, ideally, we get to a place where everybody says, yes, CC BY across the board. But that should not be a hindrance to participation in the framework whatsoever.
Yeah, my intervention to that, really important question is when you think about it from a systems level, is that I think it requires different strategies, and so I would say that there maybe is like three different elements here. The first is, as Taylor mentioned, we work directly with preprint servers to enable, facilitate, or encourage like CC BY as the primary license for preprints. So that was work directly with like infrastructure. Now we're working with funders to sort of enable openly licensed preprints through that angle. The third, I think, would be thinking about, and we did this question did come up, Theo, recognizing that there are some preprint servers that shall not be named that require registration, but that may fit more closely in a strategic intervention around standards. That maybe that was more of a of intervention that we could do through like repository or like groups or institutions that work on repositories or standards for databases instead of like directly with like the preprint servers because it requires organizations or preprint servers like Open Archive and Archive who really worked with us to make those changes. And so if we wanted to make a bigger impact, I think it would have required like an intervention through like standards. And that is something we would like to continue to think about. And that might be an important intervention from the preprint community.
Yeah, these are all really important points. I'll just add, Theo, your question is making me think about other sort of barriers to access. And I think in 2026, we should also be thinking maybe more explicitly about machine readability. And that's, not a conversation that I'm aware of that has been revisited recently, except in the context of Archive updating their infrastructure to make the archive preprints accessible as HTML and not just PDFs. But for the purposes of this framework, I think not necessarily a relevant question, but for ASAPbio's work, very relevant as we think about sort of how do we best set up an ecosystem where people can access the information that they need to access to do all the cool things that they want to be able to do. Ludo.
Yeah, I want to say I'm really glad to see this all this work, and I hope that more and more funders will actually start to participate in this. We need tools to kind of make sure that we can all kind of in an easy way navigate this landscape, and in particular also researchers would just get overwhelmed by all the complexity that we are kind of together creating. I am in a role at my university, at Leiden University, where I promote open science and in particular also things like preprinting. So I visit research teams within the university to talk about how they publish, to talk about preprinting. Sometimes they have no experience at all, but they're interested and they want to start experimenting, all of that. What I see is that one reason why research teams haven't yet adopted preprinting is just the researchers being a bit confused about how it works and kind of risks it might have. And in particular, one thing they are confused about is how preprinting and journal publishing relate to each other and how they might perhaps sometimes be kind of in conflict. If you perhaps do something by depositing a preprint that might kind of be in tension or even in violation of kind of some kind of publisher policy. So that is a bit of a stressful thing for researchers. And I think there's an opportunity here for publishers, actually. For publishers, there's an opportunity to actually show how they are supportive of preprinting. And to take away that stress. So to actually show like we facilitate preprinting and you don't need to be nervous about licensing it and all of that. It's kind of, it works with our journals. And I think actually this is a way in which publishers could then also advertise their journals, promote their journals and make them more attractive for researchers. Ideally then, of course, to make this work, the journals or the publishers should also be in a system like this. And we should be able to kind of link funder policies and perhaps institutional policies, like my institution, my university, and publisher policies. And then it can kind of easily become visible what combinations do or do not work for researchers. So I wonder if you have thought about these types of things.
Yeah, I'll start. We have been talking about those types of things a lot, and we'd be more than happy to speak with your team or your researchers about it in particular. But one of the things that I can say on this call is that we spent 2 years, I mentioned earlier, deep in a project about just open preprints in general at Creative Commons with in partnership with preprint servers. And so the majority, even from the preprint server side of the work that we ended up doing was how can we have conversations with researchers who are unsure about whether or not to preprint? How can we have workshops, trainings, webinars so that we can have more of those conversations with people who just need questions answered in order to know what their options are and how to move forward. And so, as a result of that, Ludo, we created a set of resources and a series of videos that I'd be more than happy to share so that you can, at a minimum, share those, review those, share those with your colleagues. They can all be found on Zenodo. We use Zenodo and we have a Creative Commons community on Zenodo where all of our resources can be found or downloaded. They can also be found on our website. But I will take a second to find the link and drop it in the chat. And then, like I said, we'd also be happy to have that conversation with your. Oh, Eleanor just put them in the, and Monica just put them in the chat for us. Thank you guys. Um, and like as I mentioned, we've had lots of conversations with individuals and with teams who are on the fence. And so we'd be more than happy to help facilitate that if that's helpful for you and your team.
Great, thank you, thank you. I will definitely take a look at these videos. That might actually be the kind of thing that indeed I need in these conversations.
Yeah, I think it'll at least get you, 80%, 80% to where you're trying to go or where your researchers are trying to go.
Yeah, these are awesome resources, and I will make sure we add these to the post materials from the call as well, so people can get access to those afterwards as well. I'm going to come back to Jess. I'm going to go to Catriona, and then we'll come back to Jess in a moment.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much. So I'm an open science advocate. I work at Wiley, and so I want to encourage pre-printing inside Wiley as much as possible. And I have a sort of question that's a bit related to Ludo's. I have two questions, actually. One is, I think, one of the things that make publishers in general nervous about preprints is if the preprint goes through peer review, and just say this is a hypothetical situation. And I suppose peer review could be at a journal or peer review could be via a peer review platform. It doesn't really matter where the peer review happens at one level. And the revised version, which may include markup, metadata, HTML, whatever, is actually the content is identical to the preprint, even though it's been through peer review. And I think there is a sense among some publishers that if they, for example, charge APCs for the sort of version of record, if we call it that, or that they could be accused of double dipping, or that they could somehow be legally accountable for or infringing the copyright or whatever of the author. Is there any discussion about that? I mean, we know from 30 years of the physics archive that there have been no challenges in relationship, and we know there's a spectrum of changes to preprints after peer review, from tiny to very significant, most of them being tiny. But is actually, it would be lovely to really address this sort of concern and challenge. And are there ways that Creative Commons would be sort of interested in doing that or are doing that?
Monica, you want to start with that one?
Yeah.
Hi, Monica.
Yeah, hi, good to see you again. The best place to start is the how CC BY license impacts journal publication, because I actually when I first started working on this project, like you, I really identified that as a gap from the intellectual property copyright perspective. When does it become sort of a derivative work? Are these two sort of different sort of creations? And I think that's generally sort of where like CC lies, is that the preprint is divorced from the material that goes into the version of record, so that the preprint author can keep the copyright on the preprint, but then give, if they need to sign a copyright agreement with the journal where the version of record is going, that's sort of a separate sort of branch of the of the work, so that it isn't considered like an infringement of the CC license. So just sort of thinking them as two different
Yes.
pieces of work.
I think that would be really, really helpful. I haven't seen that in writing anywhere. Just to sort of surface those issues. Am I allowed another question, or shall I let Jess go?
How about we have Jess go and I'll come back to you. I think there'll be time. Thanks. Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I have 2 points. I'll try to be as quick as I can. The first thing is I'm a physicist, and I find that ASAPbio has done the best job of approaching this problem of anybody I know. But it really bothers me that bio is baked into the name, and I'm still not clear on whether physics papers could be served by anything that ASAPbio is doing. If not, I should probably just leave. Now, the second point is that making things available for people to access and read, okay, and learn about, is pretty much what the function of the internet was originally. That is not enough, right? That creates a new problem, which is much worse than the problem of not being able to find things out. The new problem is, which things are correct? Which things should I believe? Which things are worth reading? And that was the focus of my website, opeer.org, is to try to figure out a way to make peer review functional, and at the same time as making it democratic. And that's a problem which invades all of our world now. And so I'm not sure whether you're going to attack that problem or not. It's not enough to just make things available. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. I don't know if there's a question in there for the CC folks or not, but I'll say from our point of view, we're working very eagerly on promoting Publish Review Curate as a model whereby you can potentially deal with some of this issue around how do you know what to trust or what to read and so on. And that model centers publishing preprints first, or publishing research outputs first, and then layering on top of that distributed review and evaluation and so on. So it's a real opportunity, although I guess slightly separate from the Preprint Policy Framework, which doesn't really touch the issue of review or evaluation. Shall we go back to Catriona?
Thanks. So it's actually partly related to Jess's, because AI and AGI, potentially AGI is now enabling a huge number of articles to be generated for people to mine databases and data sets and come up with articles as well, some of which will be valid and some of them won't be. But there's going to be an enormous pressure on the system. And I was interested, I saw a graph recently of submissions to archive. And if you look at this, I think it's 24, 25, it almost goes up exponentially. I think this is something that's going to happen across the board to all publishers. We'll have a tsunami of submissions. So there's two things that's involved in that. One is in terms of AI in general, and AI training in particular, is CC BY appropriate if those authors are not getting attribution? This doesn't apply to preprints, just to preprints, but to everything. And how do we ensure there is appropriate attribution for any work with a CC BY license? And the other thing is, and I suppose this is to ASAPbio, at least with the PRC model, there's how do you envisage that working? Because essentially the human resource for peer review is going to be swamped. There won't be enough reviewers for that. So those are sort of two questions. One's a sort of more legal one, and one's the other one.
Maybe I'll tackle the question around the license and AI. So you will also find in this treasure trove of resources that Eleanor linked guidance around the licenses and AI. So I'll give you the specific guidance that we have in like the research sector. So in many jurisdictions, the training falls under some element of fair use or fair dealing, depending on the jurisdiction that you are. Not all of them. So like CC's doing research.
Hugely contested, yeah.
Yeah. But and it's sort of like it's the kind of work that progresses a case at a time. So, you know, it's unique in that we can say, as of today, given the court cases that exist, certainly can speak to the United States, where, you know, that is considered falling under fair use. And so what that means is, because our licenses are copyright licenses, it doesn't trigger any of the license requirements. So you could have something that is CC BY licensed, or even having something that is CC BY NC or ND licensed, and because it falls outside of the scope of copyright, again, in many jurisdictions, including the United States, but not all, that the licenses don't apply. So you can train on that material, and it's not the model does not require the license doesn't even get triggered, so you don't have to attribute. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be advocating for attribution, which actually is another piece of work that Creative Commons is moving into. But presently, in terms of to really answer your question about the licenses and AI, we have this guidance, as well as we're actually about to issue additional guidance that really, you know, helps answer these questions across different sectors, because we know that this is something that the community is asking for. And then we have additional work that's looking into, just because the license doesn't get triggered doesn't mean that the research community doesn't need attribution. Like, we should be demanding attribution, and there actually is ways to, at the very least, approximate attribution. And how do we bring that back into sort of this new way of accessing knowledge?
And it also, to speak to Jess's, you know, attribution is the sort of first step of trust. You
Yes.
know who it's from, which is increasingly needed.
Could I just raise a point, Catriona, as you're on the call? This is kind of a related issue about AI. Now, I think I can't remember which preprint server it was, but there was one preprint server that actually stopped papers in a certain subject area because they were being absolutely spammed by AI generated or AI assisted papers, which I think is an increasing issue. And there has recently been, I don't think it's very big, but there seems to be a preprint server that actually generates AI content, or what they call robot assisted content. So I think this is an issue that needs to be addressed, certainly on the copyright and under US law. If there's no human input, or perhaps very little human input, you can't actually assign copyright. So is this going to be an increasing problem where there's a strong suspicion that preprints have been primarily generated by AI rather than the author? And how valid is the copyright?
So I put in the chat the particular case that you're talking about. So that's arXiv. I think it's specifically like computer science papers that they started with. I have spoken to arXiv. I know there's some folks here too that have been working with Open Archive. It is a very, very real problem. because is this infrastructure created when we only had generally human to human sort of sharing, and infrastructures that are supported by human and used mostly by humans. I think it is a very real problem in terms of just like the sustainability of these very important infrastructures, even into for the training of models as well, right? We need to have like the models are training on the content that are in these servers as well. I mean, this is one idea for how to attenuate the effect of the onslaught of AI, or bot assisted creation of knowledge. In terms of the copyright, I don't think we actually have specific guidance around that. It would also depend, again, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But generally, anything that comes out of an AI model is in the public domain, because it's falling under fair use or created by that. I was just in the webinar that I just came from. The example that they gave at the beginning of the discussion was that the selfie from a monkey that was taken in 2008, and how the monkey couldn't have the copyright because it wasn't human created, and also the copyright couldn't go to the photographer either. And so I think it's sort of a similar case that legally it's public domain, but I imagine that there's no process to validate that. And so because our systems are created for humans, that the default would be that the copyright just goes to the human in that process. And so, yeah, a lot of things to think about of like how these systems break down when they were created, just thinking about human interventions, including peer review. Yeah.
The fascinating point about copyright, I certainly hadn't considered what it would mean for a non-human entity to own something or not own something. I guess we think about the people who push the buttons and request the information and then claim it as their own, but I guess in some cases they might not have a ton of ground to do that. We're going back to Catriana's question about sort of how the PRC model can potentially handle these types of things. We agree that the peer review system as we currently know it is increasingly under strain. And in fact, that's part of the reason why we think that a transition to a PRC type system is actually necessary. We think that it will help things rather than further strain the system. Certainly reviewer time, human time is finite. So if there's going to be more review in a PRC system, that perhaps necessitates people withdrawing effort from a traditional publishing system and placing it into a PRC system. And maybe that's not a safe assumption, but that's one way. The other way is that I assume, just like the traditional publishers, everyone is thinking about sort of broader ways to evaluate work beyond just what individual people can do. So we need sort of broader systems to be able to have more confidence about, say, the checks that information has gone through prior to or after its publication. So in the current system, I would argue that we have sort of an overemphasis on trusting the publisher brand or reputation, or the kinds of things that publishers say that they're doing, but we don't actually have a lot of knowledge of what those things are. And probably in the future going forward, it's going to become increasingly difficult for both preprint servers and for publishers to be able to just say, you can just sort of trust the content at its face value because we say you should, and instead there will need to be, additional burden of transparency or proof to be able to say, like, no, it's undergone these checks, or we've verified information in these ways, and that's.
Yeah, I think that's where it's going. It's about how you can actually demonstrate trustworthiness, and it makes open metadata and high quality open metadata hugely important as well, to make sure those trust signals are readable.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree with that.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the call? Any last questions? Yes, publish, review, curate. Keith, that's right. And sorry, Keith, you didn't introduce yourself. Could you say who you are?
Yeah, so sorry about that. Just butted in there. I also work for Wiley. I have
Okay.
worked with Catriona on preprints. I actually work in the legal department at Wiley. So
Okay.
we're very interested in the legal aspects of preprints, particularly licensing and particularly copyright.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you everyone for your engagement and thank you to the presenters for your contributions. We're all, as always, glad to have a robust discussion here in these community calls. And we'll be having another one in about 2 months' time. So hopefully we will see you all then.
That was great. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
I'm going to
Thank
just
you.
email address on the screen if anybody wants to reach out. It's just taylor@creativecommons.org.
Yeah, thank you. And we definitely are seeking more referrals. So if you have more funders and or organizations to send our way, please do.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.